You may notice when you're changing sheets at your home that all of your mattresses have a tag attached to them, a tag that tells you that the federal government forbids you to remove the tag. So I cut it off. And I want to share with you that no SWAT team showed up at the house. I have not received a phone call from Jefferson Beauregard, our Attorney General. Now, I'm certain that at some time, somewhere, there was a perfectly good reason to have a tag permanently affixed to bedding. But I am equally sure that there is no prevailing reason for that to apply to either me or my mattress. Similarly, there's a provision in the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Kentucky that if anyone within the state is operating an automobile on any road in Kentucky, that they are required to send ahead someone on horseback or on foot to warn people that an automobile is coming down that road. Kentucky had the misfortune of holding a constitutional convention in the early part of the 20th century when automobiles were still a novelty, a noisy, intrusive, and bothersome novelty that often scared the horses and caused the cows to stop giving milk. Laws are never written in a vacuum. They are written to provide guidelines that serve the greater good of society and to correct a problem that they had. I was on a scuba trip staying on Key West a few years ago and had gone to a health club on the island to work out. And when I was headed back to the showers, there was a sign that said, "Lewd behavior will no longer be tolerated in the showers." Which could only mean that there was a time when lewd behavior was tolerated in the showers. And that having been the case, I decided that going home sweaty wasn't that bad. But you know, we set speed limits on our streets and our roads so that cars don't go so fast that they're likely to cause accidents. Around school zones and in crowded neighborhoods, it can get the speed limit down to 15 or 20 miles an hour. City streets usually hold it to 30 or 40, whereas highways might go up to 60 or 70 or 80 miles an hour. But there is nowhere in America where we are simply turned loose, as is true on the infamous German Autobahn. There are times and places driving through rural Oklahoma or Kansas or the Dakotas where it seems like a speed limit is entirely unnecessary and that 100 or 110 miles an hour seems advisable, though, as a patrolman in South Dakota explained to me last year, they don't really see it that way. Lesson learned. I suspect that the fastest cars being driven on the Autobahn are probably not being driven by Germans, but rather by American tourists who simply don't know how to behave when there are not rules governing their conduct. When you grow up with rules, it's difficult to imagine life without them. Now look, virtually everybody here was indoctrinated into a belief at a very early age that we are immortal creatures, our time on earth is short, and that short life becomes the basis of judgment of where we're going to spend eternity. And the news is either really good or really, really bad. And as absurd as that claim would seem on its face, we were assured by people that we trusted, our parents, our pastors, our priests, our Sunday school teachers, that it was real. That was the real ultimate eternal choice. And at least for me, when I went to church, I had doubts even as a child, but I saw my doctor was there for a time. The governor of the state of Kentucky was sitting in there. There were bankers, there were politicians and lawyers, and they all seemed to be buying into it. So I thought something must be wrong with me. You know, that the smartest, most intelligent, educated, professional people in the world seem to buy into that binary view of eternity. Now, it's probably been a long time since anybody in this room ever nervously believed in a final judgment. But guys, all of us did at some point in our life. And that fear was used to compel us to be decent human beings. And if you can remember the first time, and I was a philosophy major in college, and I remember sitting in a conversation about there really isn't a final judgment, there really isn't a heaven above or a hell below. And the first thought that comes to your mind is, well, then what keeps you from doing just anything? We were trained, consciously or unconsciously, to hear the Ten Commandments as a threat. It was fear of eternal torment that made you resolve not to lie or steal or commit adultery or even to commit murder. Because, you know, there's folks that deserve killing. I mean, it was always the threat of punishment that kept you from doing it. There were always a lot of complicated matters about believing the right things and sacraments and rituals and the like, but basically we've been trained to avoid egregious sins and to behave like decent people so that we would avoid the fires of hell and possibly attain to some eternal reward. And once that moral threat and promise is removed, what is it that keeps one out of the brothels, the opium dens, and the gun shops? Well, church was never really good at keeping people out of gun shops, I guess, but the other things, at least. As with many other laws, we've often found the loopholes in the Ten Commandments that still allow us to own killing machines, even if we know we're not supposed to use them, but I digress. I'll get to that topic again another day. In modern times, thinkers began to question the church's claims of authority, and the threat of hell and the lure of heaven began to lose its grip on society. The 18th century philosopher, French philosopher Claude Helvétius was one of the thought leaders who inspired the French Revolution, and he very plainly said, "Our internal conscience is not the voice of God, it is fear of the police." Even without a supernatural deity threatening us with eternal punishment, society still finds it necessary to enforce, and enforce very powerfully, negative consequences for behaviors that hurt the larger society. Ancient Israelites very conveniently put their laws into the mouth of God, so that obedience to those laws had a very stark and divine consequence. Our laws now come from the mouths of politicians, many of whom appear to think that they are gods. Punishments come, as they often did, even in ancient Israel, in the form of fines or incarceration, and in the most extreme cases, execution. But I think it's really a shame that we have raised children, training them to be decent people in order to avoid being punished or to get a reward. At some immature level, that may restrain your behavior, but it also unnaturally robs us of the more inherent inclination to love others and to be good people. Now, we're a small church in a city full of really big churches. And I would argue that we've got the best musicians of any church in town. And yeah. And I may not be the best preacher in Springfield, but as my father liked to say, sure does beat whoever's in second place. But we remain much smaller than most other community churches because we are not offering that golden ticket to a train ride to heaven, nor can we make you quake in fear in your boots, dreading a final judgment. I don't know if that's the whole explanation for why we have a few dozen folks while they have a few thousand, but I'm willing to bet that's the largest single reason. Even in an age of science and reason, a huge portion of the population is still deeply invested in magical thinking. Not always consciously, but meaningfully, superstition still guides, at least hedging their bets. I have to believe that most people don't really believe in all that magical nonsense, but they aren't 100% sure, so they're gonna hedge their bets. Oddly enough, though, many who are able to see through the veil of ecclesial lies and the snake oil of traditional religion will fall absolutely headlong into ever more silly and intellectually embarrassing practices to fill their need for some kind of mystical control of the universe. I know grown-ups, some of whom went to college, who still believe in tarot cards, horoscopes, Ouija boards, and various occult practices as if the movie Jumanji was some kind of PBS documentary. Of course, we have to take care not to be too harsh in our judgments, especially for those who grew up in Catholic tradition, wearing a scapular under their shirt to keep a demon from jumping into their soul, or a crucifix, or a saint's medallion, or a rosary to protect you from all manner of evil. And I trust that you know that holy water is not just a prop in vampire movies, but there are people who actually believe that tap water takes on some magical value when the proper incantation is said over it by the right person. I won't even bother to wade into the muddy waters of iconography and statuary, much of which does have real value as art, but what they appear to do to the brains of the gullible is nothing short of embarrassing. I will not go on to mention the magical underwear that Mormons are supposed to wear. Just acknowledging that it exists should be everything that you have to say about that. I hope what I'm saying here is not too obscure. God did not write the Ten Commandments. They were composed by an ancient Semitic tribe that was moving from being a nomadic sheep-herding society into being a settled agrarian society. And they needed the rules that would allow them to hold together as a community without killing, raping, and stealing each other out of existence. The Bible wasn't written by God, but rather it is a collection of texts from several nations over several centuries as they attempted to record what was their highest and best understanding of the meaning and purpose of life. And they conveyed these stories, these letters, poems, and philosophical musings in a way that was intended to instruct and persuade us to be better people. And in that sense, a very worthwhile project. Admittedly, it hasn't always worked all that well, but it was in all likelihood better than nothing. The relevant question is that once we have awakened from the darkness of fear of punishment or lust for reward, who then do you want to be? Once you're not being manipulated with magical thinking and superstition, once you have risen above the purely self-serving motivations of traditional religion, what is it that you do believe? What does govern your personal behavior? What sort of world would you like to be created in reaction to your faith? Because that is the more honest reading of the Ten Commandments in the first place. Not so much that a prophet brought it down from a mountain after having been written by the finger of God in stone, but it was a culture that wrote it, trying to be good people. I took a stab at restating the Big Ten. I printed that attempt in your liturgy today. I don't mean for this to be a new set of Ten Commandments, but I'm just showing you there is a way of stating these principles with an understanding of what makes for good people trying to live in a good society. Rather than insisting that everyone must observe exactly the same religion in exactly the same way, doesn't our modern culture demand that we have a value that allows people the freedom to choose the religion that they choose to practice or no religion at all? Secondly, that you should, I don't know if it's really fair for a white Protestant guy from Kentucky to try to channel Moses, but in restating the Ten Commandments, secondly, I would say to avoid the idolatry of fame and wealth and power, because you are merely human and you are absolutely as mortal as everyone else. Therefore, seek the common good rather than only serving your own personal interest. Third, value the depth of character that produces honesty, because let's face it, swearing presumes that you're dishonest at other times. It's kind of like lewd behavior will no longer be tolerated. Don't swear, just tell the truth. And the most wealthy among you should also do productive work, and the most impoverished should be given time off from labor every week. Care for the elderly and the ill among you, for you also will have your time of need. You shall not assault or murder any who live among you, nor should you passively accept all calls to military action. There shall be no sexual assault or exploitation among you, but rather all sexual intercourse shall take place between adult, fully consenting partners. Where there is mutual consent among adults, everyone else should mind their own business. Do not steal, but neither should you hoard resources in a way that impoverishes your neighbors. Respect, conserve, and use only the natural resources that can be replenished. Do not gossip, slander, or lie in a way that does harm to others. Intentional deception in business or politics is forbidden. And finally, do not allow greed or envy to pollute your society. Now, I don't know if that's entirely fair to Moses, but I am sincerely saying that since we do not have tablets of stone handed down to us from on high, we have to reach within us to say what values foster our ability to become good people and to create a good society. More than that, since there is no carrot and there is no stick to prompt our civil conduct, we must choose that we would rather be good people than not be good people. There is only the hope that there is within each of us some divine spark, a sacred and precious desire to be good people who will create a good society, a society that can and therefore must provide adequate housing, food, medical care, and education for everyone. A society that is capable of living beyond racial and national prejudices and can bring an end to war. And because we can, we must. We can discipline ourselves to act in favor of saving the earth and preserving human dignity without allowing capitalism to solely chart our course. Humanity is no longer in its infancy. It's time for us to grow up and make responsible decisions to fulfill our potential as a truly great society. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.